Episode 5. I didn't sign up for this. Leaving California was hard. I didn't sign up for this. The new and happy relationships with Dad's family were cut off way too soon, and just as I was getting used to being truly happy. Anchor raised, off we went to another state in the middle of nowhere. I'm now 6 and my brother is 4. Our birthdays are only 1 day apart. 1 day a year he gets to gloat that he is less than 2 years away from me in age. Jolly good for him. Well, we have to call my brother something, so let's name him Bob. Bob's face is freckled and he is unfortunate to have somewhat protruding teeth. My parents are already talking about braces. Bob adores me, and there are days that I truly love him, and other days where my tolerance runs thin. Bob is easy to blame for any misfortune that comes my way. He's a useful idiot at times, but he's quite capable of ratting me out if I push too hard. Bob was actually born in the UK and has a passport to prove it. I'm jealous. If he were of legal age, he'd have the luxury of returning to England anytime he wanted to. I certainly wanted to, but Mum's water broke on the military transport plane somewhere over the Pacific just before we touched down in California, and I'm cursed with a blue passport featuring a fat-faced baby and at the mercy of loud Americans. Growing up within spitting distance of Scotland, you can imagine the nearly unintelligible accent I had at the time. Even my fellow Brits from further south would furrow their foreheads with dismay in attempting to translate this poor boy's words. Suffice to say, I became a novelty in the States when speaking amongst others. Americans were fascinated with the Brits back then and even asked me what it was like to be bombed to smithereens. Dude, the war had been over for nearly 10 years. But I bravely fibbed to these idiots and described imagined horrors of German planes dropping loads of munitions onto our small village, and me having just survived bravely throughout this whole ordeal. I had not an ounce of remorse in saying so. Small boys soaked up these made-up tales as if having been there themselves. I'm sure this is where my knack for storytelling began, and the ease of outright lying became a carefully hidden weapon to be used at a later time. My new state was much higher in elevation than California and filled with desert scrub, tumbleweeds, and soaring mountains. Well, I thought, this is rather bleak compared to sunny California and all its largesse of brown people, bright smiles, and an endless supply of bananas. Would there even be bananas here? I'm trying to stay as anonymous as I can be, but you've probably already guessed I've been taken against my will to Idaho. There, I've said it, but it will hopefully make my narrative easier to understand, at least from a geographical viewpoint. There was no way my mum would even begin to entertain the thought of raising children on a massive Air Force base filled with B-52 Stratofortress bombers and bleak military housing. She has already convinced herself that Americans are barbarians who chew their food with open mouths and use slang words. Each dwelling was an exact copy of its neighbor and not a green plant to be seen for miles. Dad was still working in his mysterious intelligence capacity that no amount of forlorn pleading from young boys could make him confess. I read everything I could get my hands on. It didn't matter if it was the phone book. I read newspapers and my parents' private mail and official letters to no avail in trying to discover Dad's true identity. Was he a spy? There was the thrill of the thought of him being so, but then tempered with the reality that he drank gallons of beer and had a volatile temper. He would likely give up nuclear codes in a heartbeat if given false promises of Olympia beer and an endless supply of Lucky Strike unfiltered cigarettes. The very idea made my face hot with shame for thinking such things. So Mum was having none of it regarding military housing, and off we went to Boise, the city of trees and with a river that runs through it. I'm sure there was great debate from founding fathers as to what to name this river. One that you could actually walk across during dry spells, but finally settled unimaginably on christening it the Boise River, instead of something more worthy, such as the Columbia River. Initially, we settled into apartment, living a stone's throw away from Boise State Junior College. Again on the 2nd floor. It was too late for me to enroll in grade school classes, so I was trotted off into kindergarten that was actually someone's repurposed private home. The large main room was the kindergarten. There were tiny chairs and the floor was littered with wooden building blocks, dolls missing arms, and a scattering of plastic bits that later evolved into Legos. There were no books anywhere, not one. I was devastated. Were children not allowed to read? On the other hand, Bob was thrilled as any 4-year-old would be expected to be, as he was certainly not the only child with unfortunate teeth that would later require braces. In addition, Bob had keen hearing. The old man and his wife accepted us boys with no questions asked, but sternly warned my parents to pick us up before 6 p.m., implying that bending or breaking this rule would have consequences in one form or another. There must have been a lack of childcare options back then, because my parents heartily agreed to everything and couldn't be bothered to tour the house/kindergarten as they had to rush to work. Dad to drive 50 miles to the base, and Mum starting her work as a secretary for a mental health clinic. Yes, the very same woman who had been confined to an asylum in the UK for attempting to take her own life. I'm sure background checks hadn't even been thought of back then. Did Dad not earn enough money as a spy to provide for all of us, and for Mum to stay at home to care for us? Apparently not, and I'm stuck in a smoke-filled room with grubby children and uncombed hair. Nose-picking was also a thing. Ghastly. By this time, my hearing loss was becoming more than just a nuisance, and I was punished for not following unheard directions from the old man. In England, I would respectfully call an educational director headmaster, with every answer followed by sir. I wanted to call Mr. Clark wanker, but also knowing by doing so would, without a shadow of a doubt, bring about immediate untold consequences for my brazenness. For being a new citizen by virtue of being born on American soil, I quickly learned that children had no rights. None whatsoever. At 6 years old, I'm already speaking my mind and airing my many grievances to whomever I had issue with. Age and authority be damned. Thus, when served a particularly inedible lunch at the Clark's House of Horror, posing as a kindergarten was placed in front of me, of which spinach produced from a tin can was garishly featured, I refused to eat it. Those old enough to remember canned spinach, that of cartoon Popeye fame, and boiled to the consistency of mush, producing a sour odor, was as disgusting as one could imagine. Having already learned to not raise my voice to my father, I quietly tried to rationalize with old man Clark, but to no avail. With shocking ferocity, I was ripped away from my bench and forced to undress to nakedness in front of all. The wanker took the spinach off my plate with his hand and plopped it into Missy's bowl. She was their wiener dog and was always treated like a princess. Missy tried to edge her way in to see if what I was being forced to eat had any real value to her. One whiff of it had her scrabbling backwards for safety. I had to eat the putrid spinach on hands and knees without utensils. At least I was allowed to put clothes back on afterwards, but had to stand nose to wall in the corner until my parents arrived. Thankfully, they were on time. My telling of this unbelievable travesty to my parents in the car fell on deaf ears. Mr. Clark did not report my behavior to my uniformed-clad father. In fact, had Dad stayed longer, they probably would have shared a beer and a smoke. My brother did not vouch for me, which immediately had my mind racing in directions of ways to plot unspeakable revenge for his betrayal. Years later, my mum still thinks I'm misremembering or fantasizing. Whatever, spilled milk and all that rot. The last thing I'll share about the Clark's House of Horror was their long dining room table that had a tablecloth that draped nearly to the floor. Beneath that dingy white-clothed cave became my imagined safe space. I say imagined because, as I'm sure, the Clarks knew exactly where I was the whole time. Other children would slip in and out, secrets were shared and bodies were explored from both sexes. It was just something that happened and was treated as casually as playing a game of fish. I wonder now why we were never found out and addressed harshly by Mr. and Mrs. Wanker. Surely they knew, right? The lack of intervention was equivalent to being given a golden pass to do whatever I wanted without fear of repercussion.